The fluorescent lights above my desk were flickering again, casting shadows across the endless spreadsheets that had become my entire world. My chest felt tight, my vision was getting blurry, and suddenly the floor of the accounting office was rushing up to meet me. When I came to, my coworkers were standing over me with worried faces, and all I could think about was calling the one person who was supposed to care about me no matter what. I never expected those words to come out of her mouth. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Becca Martinez, and 3 months ago, I thought I had my life figured out. I was 26, working as a junior accountant at Hillcrest Financial Services in downtown Phoenix, living in a cramped studio apartment that ate up most of my paycheck, but hey, I was independent, right? That's what everyone kept telling me, especially my mother, Patricia. The morning everything changed like any other Tuesday. My alarm went off at 6:30, I grabbed my usual gas station coffee and stale bagel, and trudged into the office building that smelled perpetually of cleaning chemicals and broken dreams. Hillcrest Financial wasn't exactly Wall Street, but it paid the bills, barely. I'd been pulling 12-hour days for the past 2 weeks because our department was understaffed and tax season was approaching like a freight train. My supervisor, Mr. Chen, had this annoying habit of dumping last-minute projects on my desk with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Becca, I know you can handle this," he'd say, as if overworking me was some kind of compliment. That Tuesday, I was on my 4th cup of coffee by 10 a.m., trying to reconcile a client's books that looked like they'd been organized by a tornado. The numbers weren't adding up, my head was pounding, and I kept having to squint at the computer screen because everything seemed to be getting fuzzy around the edges. "You look terrible," said Jenny Caldwell, my cubicle neighbor. Jenny was one of those people who somehow managed to look perfectly put together even during tax season hell. Her blonde hair was always in a neat bun, her blazers never wrinkled, and she had this annoying habit of eating salads that actually looked appetizing. "Thanks for the pep talk," I muttered, rubbing my temples. "Seriously though, when's the last time you went home before 9 p.m. or ate something that wasn't from a vending machine?" I couldn't remember. The past few weeks had blurred together into one continuous loop of spreadsheets, coffee, and the weird humming noise the office air conditioning made. I'd been living on energy drinks, microwave burritos, and whatever free donuts showed up in the break room. "I'm fine," I said, which was what I always said. It was easier than admitting that I felt like I was drowning in quicksand, and every day I sank a little deeper. The truth was, I hadn't been fine for months. Ever since I'd graduated college 2 years ago with a degree in accounting and a mountain of student debt, I'd been scrambling to stay afloat. My parents had made it clear that once I turned 25, I was on my own. "Time to spread your wings, mija," my dad had said with a pat on my shoulder. My mother had been less gentle about it. "You're an adult now, Becca. Adults don't come running to mommy and daddy every time life gets hard." So I didn't. When my first apartment had a roach problem, I dealt with it myself. When my car broke down and I couldn't afford the repairs, I took the bus for 3 months until I could scrape together enough money. When I got food poisoning from that sketchy taco truck and spent 2 days barely able to leave my bathroom, I suffered through it alone. Independence, right? Around noon that Tuesday, I started feeling worse. The headache that had been nagging me all morning turned into something that felt like someone was driving an ice pick through my skull. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type, and I kept having these weird moments where I'd lose track of what I was doing mid-sentence. "Hey, Chen," I heard someone call out. "Martinez doesn't look so good." I tried to wave them off, to insist I was fine, but when I opened my mouth, no words came out. The office started tilting sideways, the fluorescent lights got impossibly bright, and then everything went black. I woke up on the break room couch with Jenny hovering over me, holding a wet paper towel to my forehead. Mr. Chen was there too, looking more annoyed than concerned, like my collapsing was somehow an inconvenience to his schedule. "Should we call an ambulance?" Jenny was asking. "No," I croaked out. "No ambulance. I can't afford—" "Becca, you literally passed out at your desk. That's not normal." But normal was relative, wasn't it? Nothing about my life felt normal anymore. I was working myself into the ground for a job that barely paid enough to cover my basic expenses, living in an apartment where the heat didn't work properly, and the neighbors upstairs sounded like they were training for American Ninja Warrior at 3 in the morning. I just need some water, I insisted, trying to sit up. The room spun like a carnival ride, and I had to close my eyes to keep from throwing up. You need to go to a doctor, Mr. Chen said, but his tone suggested he was more worried about liability than my actual health. Take the rest of the day off. The rest of the day off, like that was some generous gift instead of him covering his own ass. Jenny helped me to the parking garage, where I sat in my beat-up Honda Civic for 10 minutes, trying to gather the courage to drive. My hands were still shaking, and I kept seeing spots in my peripheral vision. But what choice did I have? The urgent care clinic was 20 minutes away, and I definitely couldn't afford an Uber. The drive was terrifying. I had to pull over twice because I thought I might pass out again. When I finally made it to the clinic, the waiting room was packed with sick kids and elderly people, and the receptionist looked at me like I was personally responsible for ruining her day. "Insurance?" she asked in a bored tone. I handed over my card, knowing that even with insurance, this visit was going to cost me at least $200 I didn't have. But what else could I do? Ignore it and hope it went away? After an hour of waiting, a nurse practitioner, who looked younger than me, finally called my name. She ran some basic tests, asked me about my symptoms, and delivered the diagnosis with all the warmth of a grocery store self-checkout machine. "Exhaustion and malnutrition," she said, scribbling something on her clipboard. "When's the last time you had a proper meal, or 8 hours of sleep?" I couldn't remember that either. "You need to slow down," she continued. "Take some time off work, eat regular meals, get some rest. If you keep pushing yourself like this, you're going to end up in the emergency room." Time off work, regular meals, rest. She might as well have told me to grow wings and fly to the moon. "I can't take time off," I said. "I'll lose my job." She gave me a look that I'd seen before. The same look people gave homeless veterans asking for change or single mothers using food stamps at the grocery store. Pity mixed with judgment, like my situation was simultaneously tragic and somehow my own fault. "Well, then you need to figure something else out," she said, handing me a pamphlet about stress management that I was definitely not going to read, "because your body is telling you it can't keep up with this pace." The bill came to $247. I put it on my credit card and tried not to think about how I was already maxed out on 2 others. Sitting in my car in the clinic parking lot, I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. The smart thing would have been to go home, order some takeout, and try to get a decent night's sleep for once. But instead, I found myself dialing my mother's number. Patricia Martinez answered on the third ring, and I could hear the TV in the background, some talk show she'd been watching religiously since I was a kid. "Hi, Mom," I said, and my voice cracked a little. "I'm not doing so well." I could hear her shifting in her chair, probably reaching for the remote to mute the television. That was Patricia's version of giving me her full attention, not actually pausing her show, just turning down the volume. "What do you mean you're not doing so well?" she asked, and there was already an edge to her voice, like I was interrupting something important. "I collapsed at work today, Mom. I had to go to urgent care." Silence. Not the concerned kind of silence where someone's processing scary news. The irritated kind, where someone's already forming their response before you finished explaining. "Collapsed? What did you do now? What did you do now?" Not, "Are you okay?" or "What happened?" What did you do now? Like this was somehow another one of my screw-ups that she'd have to deal with. "I didn't do anything," I said, trying to keep the defensiveness out of my voice. "The doctor said it was exhaustion and malnutrition. I've been working 12-hour days and barely eating and whose fault is that?" The question hit me like a slap. I sat there in my car, watching other people walk to their vehicles with their normal problems and their normal families, and tried to process what she'd just said. "Mom, I'm not asking you to fix anything. I just wanted to tell someone what happened. I was scared." Scared? She let out this laugh that wasn't really a laugh.
Bika, you're 26 years old. You moved out. You wanted independence. And now you want to call mommy every time things get tough?
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. This is the first time I've called you in 3 months. Good, because you're an adult now, and adults handle their own problems. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, feeling that familiar burn behind my eyes that meant I was about to cry. But I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. I know I'm an adult mom. I pay my own rent. I pay my own bills. I handle my own problems. But I collapsed at work today and had to go to the doctor alone, and I just thought maybe my mother might want to know that her daughter, what? Made bad choices and now wants someone else to clean up the mess? The words hung in the air between us like poison gas. I could hear her TV show in the background, some audience laughing at a joke I couldn't make out. Normal people having normal reactions to normal things. What bad choices? I asked, genuinely confused. Working too hard? Trying to pay my bills? Don't play dumb, Becca. You chose that job. You chose that apartment. You chose to live beyond your means instead of being smart about money. And now you want sympathy because the choices you made have consequences? The words hung in the air between us like poison gas. I could hear her TV show in the background, some audience laughing at a joke I couldn't make out. Normal people having normal reactions to normal things. What bad choices? I asked, genuinely confused. Working too hard? Trying to pay my bills? Don't play dumb, Becca. You chose that job. You chose that apartment. You chose to live beyond your means instead of being smart about money. And now you want sympathy because the choices you made have consequences? Live beyond my means? I was living in a studio apartment with a broken heater, eating microwave burritos for dinner, and driving a car that made concerning noises every time I started it. If this was living beyond my means, I couldn't imagine what living within them would look like. I'm not living beyond my means, I said quietly. I'm barely surviving. Oh, please, don't be so dramatic. Dramatic? That was Patricia's favorite word for any emotion that wasn't convenient for her. Sad? Dramatic. Frustrated? Dramatic. Having a panic attack because you can't afford groceries and medication in the same week? Definitely dramatic. You know what, Mom? Forget I called. I started to hang up, but her voice stopped me. Becca, wait. For a second, I thought maybe she was going to apologize. Maybe she'd realized that her daughter had just told her she collapsed at work and needed some basic human compassion. You need to understand something, she continued, and her voice was harder now, colder. When you moved out and decided you didn't need us anymore, that went both ways. You don't get to be independent when it's convenient and then come running back when things get difficult. I never said I didn't need you anymore. You and Dad told me it was time to be on my own. Because it was time. Because we raised you to be self-sufficient, not to be calling home every time you have a bad day at work. A bad day at work? Like collapsing from exhaustion was just a minor inconvenience, a stubbed toe or a difficult customer? This isn't about a bad day, I said, and I could hear my voice getting shaky. I haven't eaten a real meal in weeks. I work 12 hours a day and can barely afford rent. I don't have friends because I don't have time for friends. I haven't been on a date in 8 months because I'm too tired to even think about dating. And today, I literally fell unconscious at my desk. And that's not my problem anymore. The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually gasped, sitting there in that clinic parking lot, watching a woman help her elderly father into a car, watching a young mother juggle a diaper bag and a toddler, watching all these people who seemed to have others who cared about them. Not your problem anymore, I repeated. That's right. You're not my problem anymore, Becca. You haven't been for a year now. I wasn't her problem anymore. Her daughter, who she'd raised for 24 years, who she'd taught to ride a bike and helped with homework and braided her hair for school pictures, was not her problem anymore. I wasn't asking you to solve my problems, I said, And now I was scared and alone, and I wanted to hear my mother's voice. Well, you heard it. And what you heard is that you need to figure this out yourself. In the background, I could hear her TV show getting louder. She'd turned the volume back up. Mom, I have to go, Becca. My program's back on. The line went dead. I sat there for a long time, holding my phone, staring at the call end screen. Around me, life continued. People came and went from the clinic, dealing with their own problems, leaning on their own support systems, having their own conversations with people who cared about them. 26 years of birthdays and Christmas mornings and scraped knees and bad report cards and graduation photos. 26 years of I love you too, Miha, and sweet dreams and drive safe. And it all came down to this. Not my problem anymore. I drove home in a daze, barely paying attention to the road. My studio apartment felt smaller than usual when I walked in, like the walls had moved closer together while I was gone. The stack of bills on my counter seemed higher. The empty refrigerator seemed emptier. I ordered pizza because it was the only food I could think of that would arrive without me having to leave my apartment again. And while I waited, I called in sick for the next day. Mr. Chen wasn't happy about it, but I didn't care. The doctor had told me to rest, and for once in my life, I was going to listen. The pizza arrived an hour later, a thin, greasy thing that cost me $23 including tip, but it was the first real meal I'd had in days. I ate half of it, sitting on my couch, staring at my phone, thinking about calling my father. But if Patricia felt this way, how did he feel? Had they talked about this? Had they decided together that their daughter was no longer their concern? The thought of having that conversation twice in one day was more than I could handle. Instead, I crawled into bed at 7 p.m. and stared at the ceiling, listening to my upstairs neighbors and wondering how I'd gotten to this place, how I'd become someone whose own mother couldn't spare even 5 minutes of basic compassion. I woke up the next morning feeling like I'd been hit by a truck, but for the first time in weeks, I'd actually slept for more than 4 hours straight. The sunlight streaming through my blinds looked different somehow, brighter, more real. Maybe that's what happens when you're not running on fumes and caffeine. My phone had 3 missed calls from work and a string of increasingly irritated text messages from Mr. Chen. The last one read, "If you're not in by noon, we need to discuss your commitment to this position." Commitment to this position? The position that had literally made me collapse from exhaustion. The position that paid me just enough to afford ramen noodles and anxiety attacks. I turned my phone face down and made myself scrambled eggs instead of my usual gas station breakfast. Real eggs, with butter, like a human being. While they cooked, I tried not to think about yesterday's phone call, but Patricia's words kept echoing in my head. Not my problem anymore. 24 hours ago, I would have panicked about Mr. Chen's threats. I would have thrown on yesterday's clothes and raced to the office apologizing profusely for daring to prioritize my health over his spreadsheets. But something had shifted overnight, like a switch had been flipped. Maybe it was finally getting some sleep. Maybe it was eating actual food. Or maybe it was the crushing realization that I truly was on my own in a way I'd never understood before. I called Jenny instead of Mr. Chen. "Oh my God, Becca, are you okay?" she answered on the first ring. "Chen's been stomping around here all morning asking where you are. I told him you were literally unconscious on the break room floor yesterday, but he just keeps muttering about deadlines." "I'm fine," I said, and for the first time in months, it wasn't entirely a lie. "Listen, can you do me a favor? Can you clean out my desk and pack everything in a box?" Silence on the other end. "Becca, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I quit." The words felt strange coming out of my mouth, like speaking a foreign language I'd just learned. I quit. When was the last time I'd quit anything? Patricia had raised me to stick things out, to push through, to never give up, even when giving up was the smartest thing you could do. "You can't quit," Jenny whispered, like she was afraid someone might overhear. "You need this job." "Do I? Because yesterday this job put me in urgent care, and today my boss is threatening to fire me for taking a sick day that a doctor ordered." "But what are you going to do? How are you going to pay rent?" "Good question.
I had about $800 in my checking account and 3 maxed out credit cards. My rent was due in 12 days. But for some reason, these facts didn't terrify me the way they should have. I don't know yet, but I know I can't keep doing this. After I hung up with Jenny, I called Mr. Chen directly. He answered with his usual charming warmth. Martinez, you better have a good explanation for. I quit.
Another silence. Then, you what? I quit, effective immediately. Jenny's packing up my desk. You can't just quit in the middle of tax season. We have deadlines, we have clients. Then maybe you shouldn't have created a work environment that literally makes people collapse from exhaustion. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but not from low blood sugar this time. This was adrenaline, pure and simple, the kind of rush you get from jumping off a cliff right before you realize you might not have a parachute. The next few hours were a blur of phone calls and internet searches. I applied for unemployment benefits, which would take weeks to process and wouldn't cover even half my expenses. I browsed job listings, most of which either required experience I didn't have or offered wages that wouldn't cover my student loan payments, let alone rent. By evening, the adrenaline had worn off and reality was setting in. I'd just quit my job, my stable, regular, soul-crushing job that at least guaranteed a paycheck every 2 weeks. And I'd done it without any backup plan, without any safety net, without anyone to fall back on. Because my safety net had made it very clear yesterday that I wasn't her problem anymore. I was scrolling through Craigslist, looking at ads for roommates, and wondering if I could swallow my pride enough to move in with strangers when my phone rang. Unknown number with a Phoenix area code. Is this Becca Martinez? The voice was warm, older, with a slight accent I couldn't place. Yes, who is this? My name is Rosa Hernandez. I own Rosa's Kitchen downtown. Jenny Caldwell gave me your number. She said you might be looking for work. Jenny, sweet, perfectly put together Jenny, who I'd never really considered a close friend, but who apparently cared more about my well-being than my own mother. Yes, I am, I said, trying to sound professional despite the fact that I was wearing pajama pants and eating leftover pizza for lunch. Would you be interested in coming in tomorrow to talk? I need someone to help with my books, and Jenny mentioned you have accounting experience. Rosa's Kitchen. I'd walked past it 100 times on my way to and from Hillcrest Financial, always meaning to stop in, but never having the time. It was one of those small, family-owned places that looked like it had been there forever, with hand-painted signs in the windows and the kind of warm lighting that made you want to linger. I'd love to, I said. What time works for you? We arranged to meet at 10 the next morning. After I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not the desperate, grasping kind of hope that comes from buying lottery tickets, but real hope. The kind that makes you think, maybe, just maybe, things might work out. I spent the evening doing something I hadn't done in years. I cooked a real dinner. Pasta with actual vegetables, not from a microwave. I opened my laptop and researched Rosa's Kitchen online, reading reviews that described the food as like eating at your abuela's house and the most authentic Mexican food in Phoenix. The owner, Rosa Hernandez, had opened the restaurant 15 years ago after immigrating from Guadalajara with her family. She'd started with nothing but a few family recipes and a determination to share her culture with her new community. The photos showed a small but bustling place, filled with families and couples and groups of friends who looked genuinely happy to be there. It was everything Hillcrest Financial wasn't: warm, personal, real. That night, I called my father. I'd been putting it off all day, terrified that he'd echo Patricia's cold dismissal, that he'd confirm what I was starting to suspect, that I really was completely alone in the world. But I needed to know. I needed to hear it from him directly. He answered on the second ring, and his voice was cautious. Becca, how are you, mija? Mija. My heart clenched at the familiar endearment. Patricia hadn't called me that in years. I'm okay, Dad. I called Mom yesterday and told her I collapsed at work, and I stopped, not sure how to explain what had happened without sounding like I was trying to get him to take sides. She told me, he said quietly. We talked after you called. Oh,
So they had discussed it. They'd made this decision together. Your mother is, she's worried that if we keep helping you, you'll never learn to stand on your own. Help me? As if a phone call where I shared what had happened to me was the same thing as asking for money or a place to crash? Dad, I wasn't asking for help. I was just scared and wanted to talk to someone. Another long pause. In the background, I could hear the familiar sounds of home, the TV, the dishwasher running, the normal sounds of a normal family going about their normal evening. I know, Mija, but your mother, she thinks we've been too soft on you. She thinks we need to let you figure things out completely on your own. And what do you think? The pause that followed lasted forever. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet I had to strain to hear him. I think maybe she's right. Those 3 words from my father hit harder than anything my mother had said. I think maybe she's right. At least Patricia had been cold and direct. My dad's quiet betrayal felt like watching someone slowly twist a knife. After we hung up, I sat on my couch for an hour, staring at the wall and processing the fact that both of my parents had essentially written me off. 26 years of family dinners and birthday parties and bedtime stories, and it all came down to this. They thought I was too weak to handle life without them stepping in. Except I'd never asked them to step in. I'd been handling everything alone for 2 years. All I'd wanted was 5 minutes of basic human compassion from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The next morning, I walked into Rosa's kitchen at exactly 10 a.m. The smell hit me before I'd even fully opened the door. Cumin, garlic, fresh cilantro, and something sweet baking in the back. It was the opposite of Hillcrest Financial's sterile, chemical-scented air. This smelled like home, or at least like what home was supposed to smell like. The restaurant was small, maybe 20 tables, with mismatched chairs and colorful painted walls covered in family photos and Mexican folk art. Mariachi music played softly in the background, and morning sunlight streamed through windows decorated with papel picado banners that cast rainbow shadows across the worn wooden floors. "You must be Becca." I turned to see a woman in her early 50s approaching from behind the counter. She had graying hair pulled back in a neat bun, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and flour dusted on her apron. This had to be Rosa. "Yes, thank you so much for meeting with me on such short notice." She smiled and gestured toward a corner table. Sit, sit. Can I get you some coffee? Have you eaten breakfast?" Before I could answer, she was already heading toward the kitchen, calling out something in rapid Spanish to someone in the back. She returned with 2 steaming mugs of coffee and a plate of what looked like the most perfect pastries I'd ever seen. "Conchas," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "My grandmother's recipe. Try one." I bit into the sweet bread, and it was like tasting childhood memories I'd never had. Warm, soft, with just the right amount of sweetness and a hint of cinnamon that made me want to close my eyes and savor every bite. "This is incredible," I said, and Rosa beamed like I'd just complimented her own child. "Now," she said, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug, "tell me about yourself. Jenny said you worked at that big accounting firm downtown." I explained my background, my experience with bookkeeping and tax preparation, carefully leaving out the part about collapsing from exhaustion and quitting without notice. But Rosa had that kind of face that made you want to tell the truth, and before I knew it, the whole story was tumbling out. "So you quit yesterday?" she asked when I'd finished. "Yes, I know it probably sounds irresponsible, but..." She held up a hand to stop me. "Mija, I've been running this restaurant for 15 years. You know how many people I've seen work themselves into the ground for bosses who don't care if they live or die? Too many. Mija." The word from my father's mouth had felt like a goodbye, but from Rosa, it felt like a welcome. "The truth is," she continued, "I've been putting off dealing with my books for months. My accountant retired last spring, and I've been trying to handle everything myself. But I'm a cook, not a bookkeeper. I burn dinner when I try to balance the register at the same time." She laughed, and it was such a genuine, warm sound that I found myself smiling for the first time in days. What I need is someone who understands numbers, but also understands what it means to run a family business. Someone who won't just look at spreadsheets, but will see the people behind those numbers. We talked for another hour about the restaurant's needs, my experience, and what the job would entail. It wasn't just bookkeeping. Rosa needed help with inventory management, vendor relationships, and even some marketing. The pay was less than what I'd been making at Hillcrest, but it included meals and flexible hours, plus the possibility of profit sharing if the restaurant did well.
I have one question for you, Rosa said as we were wrapping up. Why do you want this job? And don't give me some interview answer about career growth or whatever. Tell me the real reason. I looked around the restaurant, at the family photos on the walls, at the way the afternoon light was starting to slant through the windows, at Rosa's patient, encouraging face. The real reason was that this place felt like what I'd been missing without even realizing it. Warmth, community, a sense that the work you did mattered to real people. I want to work somewhere that feels like it has a soul, I said finally. I want to help something grow instead of just pushing papers around until I burn out. Rosa nodded slowly. Can you start Monday? Just like that, I had a job. Not just any job, but one that came with free meals, a boss who seemed to actually care about my well-being, and an environment that didn't make me want to hide under my desk. Walking home from Rosa's kitchen, I felt lighter than I had in months. The sun seemed brighter, the Phoenix heat less oppressive. I stopped at a grocery store and bought ingredients for actual meals: chicken, vegetables, rice, spices. Real food that required preparation and care, not just microwaving and hoping for the best. That evening, I was in my kitchen cooking dinner when my phone rang. Jenny's name popped up on the screen. So, she said the moment I answered, how did it go with Rosa? I got the job. I start Monday. Oh my God, that's amazing! I told you she was wonderful. She's been looking for someone like you for months. Jenny, I said, stirring the rice I was making from scratch for the first time in years, why did you do that? You barely know me. We're just coworkers. A pause. Then, we're coworkers. And because nobody should have to go through what you were going through alone. I watched you getting thinner and more exhausted every day, and I kept thinking someone should say something, someone should help, but everyone was too busy with their own stuff. But you weren't. My mom died when I was 23, she said quietly, breast cancer, and I remember what it felt like when people I thought cared about me just disappeared. They didn't know what to say, so they said nothing. They didn't know how to help, so they didn't try. I swore I'd never be that person for someone else. We talked for another 20 minutes about the job, about Rosa, about Jenny's own story. When we hung up, I realized I'd just had the longest conversation with a friend that I'd had in over a year. A friend who'd gone out of her way to help me when my own parents wouldn't even offer basic emotional support. I called Rosa that evening to thank her again and confirm my start date. She answered on the first ring, like she'd been expecting my call. Second thoughts already? She asked, but her tone was teasing, not worried. No second thoughts. I just wanted to say thank you. Not just for the job, but for treating me like a person today, for caring enough to ask real questions and listen to real answers. Ay, mija, she said, and I could hear her smiling through the phone. That's just how family treats family. Family. The word hung in the air after we said goodbye. Patricia and my father had made it clear that I was no longer part of their family, that I was too much trouble, too needy, not worth their time or concern. But here was this woman I'd known for all of 4 hours, calling me family just because I'd been honest with her about needing help. Maybe family wasn't just about blood relations. Maybe it was about finding people who saw you struggling and decided to care anyway. My first day at Rosa's kitchen started at 8 a.m. with the smell of fresh tortillas and the sound of Rosa singing along to old Mexican ballads while she prepped vegetables for the lunch rush. I'd arrived 15 minutes early, nervous about making a good impression, but Rosa just handed me an apron and a cup of coffee like I'd been working there for years. Miguel, ven acá, she called to a young man arranging tables in the dining room. Come meet Becca, our new bookkeeper.
Miguel looked about my age, with kind eyes and an easy smile that reached all the way to his eyes. He was Rosa's nephew, she explained, who helped with everything from waiting tables to fixing the temperamental espresso machine that made grinding noises every morning. "Welcome to the madhouse," he said, shaking my hand. "Fair warning, Tia Rosa will try to feed you constantly. Don't fight it, you'll lose." As if to prove his point, Rosa appeared at my elbow with a plate of scrambled eggs, black beans, and homemade salsa. "Breakfast," she announced. "You can't work on an empty stomach." The eggs were perfect, creamy and seasoned with something that made them taste like sunshine. I couldn't remember the last time someone had cooked breakfast for me, or the last time I'd eaten breakfast that hadn't come from a drive-through window or vending machine. "Rosa, this is incredible, but you don't have to." Stop," she waved me off. "You think I'm going to let you sit in my kitchen and not feed you? What kind of person do you think I am?" Rosa's office was a small room behind the kitchen, cluttered with invoices, receipts, and what appeared to be 3 months' worth of unopened mail. An ancient desktop computer sat on a desk that had definitely seen better days, surrounded by coffee-stained notebooks and a calculator that looked like it belonged in a museum. "I know it's a mess," Rosa said apologetically. "Like I said, numbers and I don't get along so well." But it wasn't really a mess. It was just the paperwork of a busy, thriving business run by someone who cared more about feeding people than filing systems. As I started sorting through everything, I could see the story of the restaurant in the receipts. Orders for the freshest ingredients, payments to local suppliers, donations to community events, tips distributed fairly among the staff. This wasn't corporate accounting where you manipulated numbers to make shareholders happy. This was real money affecting real people's lives. Around 10:30, the morning quiet was interrupted by a commotion in the dining room. Through the office doorway, I could see an older man in an expensive suit gesturing angrily at Miguel while Rosa hurried over from the kitchen. "Sir, please, let's talk about this calmly," Miguel was saying, but the man was having none of it. "I've been patient long enough," the man said. 3 months behind on rent, Rosa. This is a business, not a charity." My stomach dropped. Rosa was behind on rent. 3 months behind, which meant she owed thousands of dollars and was probably facing eviction. And here I was, another expense she couldn't afford, another mouth to feed. I stood up to go tell her I understood if she needed to rescind the job offer, but something in Rosa's posture stopped me. She wasn't cowering or apologizing. She was standing straight, looking the landlord directly in the eyes. "Mr. Patterson, I've never missed a rent payment in 15 years. When the pandemic hit and I lost 80% of my business for 6 months, did I ask you for help? No, I figured it out. When the city construction project blocked half my parking for 4 months and my lunch crowd disappeared, did I come crying to you? No, I handled it. That's not my problem." "Let me finish," Rosa said firmly. "I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for the same consideration you'd give any tenant who's been reliable for 15 years and is going through a temporary rough patch. I have a payment plan, I have new revenue streams coming in, and I have every intention of catching up." The landlord looked around the restaurant like he was calculating its value for demolition. "You have 2 weeks, Rosa. 2 weeks to bring the account current, or I start eviction proceedings." After he left, the restaurant fell silent. The few customers who'd been there for breakfast coffee looked uncomfortable, like they'd witnessed something private. Rosa stood in the middle of the dining room for a moment, then walked back toward the kitchen with her shoulders still straight and her head still high. I followed her to the office, where she sat down heavily in her chair and put her head in her hands. "Rosa, I'm so sorry. If you need to let me go—" "No," she said without looking up. "This isn't about you, mija. This is about what happens when you try to do the right thing in a world that only cares about profit margins." Over the next hour, as I continued organizing the paperwork, Rosa told me what had happened. During the pandemic, when most restaurants were laying off staff, Rosa had kept everyone on payroll as long as possible. When business finally picked up again, she'd given raises to employees who'd stuck with her through the worst of it. When a regular customer had lost his job and couldn't afford his usual lunch, she'd fed him anyway and told him to pay when he could. "I know it's not good business," she said. "My accountant used to tell me I was too soft, too generous. But what's the point of having a business if you don't use it to take care of people?" The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was Rosa worried about being too generous, too caring, while my own mother had cut me off for being too needy. The woman who'd known me for less than a week was treating me with more kindness than the woman who'd raised me. I spent the afternoon diving deep into Rosa's finances, looking for solutions. The books told the story of a business owner who prioritized people over profits, who'd weathered every crisis by taking care of her community first and worrying about the bottom line second. It was admirable, but it was also unsustainable.
By closing time, I had a plan. "Rosa, sit down," I said, spreading printouts across the office desk. "I think I found a way to help." I'd identified several areas where the restaurant was losing money, not through generosity, but through inefficiency. Overpaying for certain supplies because she was loyal to vendors who'd raised their prices. Missing out on tax deductions she was entitled to. Not charging enough for catering orders that required extra staff time. If we renegotiate your supplier contracts, adjust your catering pricing, and apply for these tax credits you've been missing, we can increase your monthly revenue by about 15% without changing anything about how you treat your customers or employees. Rosa studied the numbers, her expression growing more hopeful with each page. "And this?" she asked, pointing to a calculation I'd circled in red. "That's how much extra you'll have each month if we implement all these changes. Enough to catch up on rent in 4 months instead of 12, and enough to build a real emergency fund so you never have to choose between paying rent and paying your employees again." Rosa was quiet for a long moment, staring at the papers. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Mija, how did you figure all this out in one day?" "Because I care about this place," I said simply. "Because you gave me a chance when I needed one, and I want to help you succeed." She stood up and pulled me into a hug that smelled like cinnamon and comfort. "I knew Jenny was right about you," she said. "I knew you were exactly what this place needed." Walking home that evening, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Useful. Not just busy, not just grinding through tasks to collect a paycheck, but actually useful. I'd spent one day at Rosa's kitchen and already found ways to help save a business that mattered to real people. When I got home, there was a voicemail from my father. For a moment, my heart leaped. Maybe he'd reconsidered. Maybe he wanted to apologize. Maybe there was hope for repairing our relationship. "Becca, it's Dad. Your mother and I have been talking, and we think it would be best if you didn't call for a while. Give us all some space to figure things out. Take care of yourself." Figure things out? Like their daughter's well-being was a puzzle they needed to solve, rather than a person they were supposed to love. I deleted the message and made myself dinner. Chicken with vegetables and rice, seasoned with spices Rosa had sent home with me. Real food, prepared with care, in a kitchen that was starting to feel like home. My parents thought I needed to figure things out on my own. They were right about that, just not in the way they meant. I didn't need to figure out how to survive their absence. I needed to figure out how to build a life so full of genuine love and support that their absence didn't matter anymore. 2 weeks into my new job, I'd fallen into a rhythm that felt more natural than anything I'd experienced in years. Mornings at Rosa's kitchen began with fresh coffee and whatever Rosa had decided I needed to try that day. Sometimes it was leftover mole from the previous night's dinner service, sometimes homemade pan dulce that was still warm from the oven. She treated feeding people like a sacred duty, and I was learning not to protest when she showed up at my desk with a plate. The financial turnaround was working faster than I'd anticipated. The supplier renegotiations alone had saved the restaurant almost $800 in the first week. Rosa's face when I showed her the numbers was worth every late night I'd spent reorganizing her entire filing system. "Is this real?" she asked, staring at the spreadsheet on my laptop screen. "We're actually going to make it?"
You're going to make it, I corrected. This place was already successful, Rosa. You just needed someone to help you see it clearly. But our 2-week deadline was approaching fast, and even with all the improvements, we were still short of what we needed to satisfy Mr. Patterson. That's when Miguel suggested something that changed everything. "What if we do a fundraiser?" he said during our usual afternoon planning session. We'd gotten into the habit of meeting every day at 3, when the lunch rush died down and before the dinner prep began. "Not charity," he added quickly, seeing Rosa's expression, "something that gives people value while helping us catch up." "What kind of fundraiser?" I asked. "A community dinner. Showcase all of Tia Rosa's specialties, maybe some dishes that aren't on the regular menu. Charge a premium, but make it an event. Live music, maybe some local artists selling their work. Turn it into a celebration of everything this place means to the neighborhood." Rosa's eyes lit up. "My grandmother's cochinita pibil recipe. I haven't made that in years because it takes 2 days and feeds 50 people.
Exactly. Make it feel special, exclusive. People will pay more because they're getting something they can't get anywhere else. I started running numbers in my head. If we charge $40 per person and get a full house, that's $800 for one night. Do it twice? $1,600, Miguel finished, plus whatever we make on drinks and desserts. Rosa was already pacing, her mind clearly racing through possibilities. We could do it next Friday and Saturday. 2 seatings each night if we stagger them right. Maria's daughter plays guitar, she could perform. And that artist, David, who comes in for lunch every Tuesday, he's always looking for places to show his paintings. This was Rosa in her element, not worried about profit margins or rent payments, but excited about bringing people together, creating experiences, and building community. Watching her transform from stressed business owner to passionate hostess reminded me why I'd wanted to work here in the first place. We spent the rest of the week planning every detail. I handled the logistics and finances, while Rosa and Miguel focused on the menu and atmosphere. Word spread through the neighborhood faster than we'd expected. By Thursday, we were completely booked for both nights. Friday evening arrived with an energy I'd never felt at any corporate event. The dining room had been transformed, with string lights and candles, local artwork hung on every available wall space, and the smell of Rosa's grandmother's cochinita pibil filled the entire building. Maria's daughter Sophia sat in the corner with her guitar, playing soft Mexican folk songs that made everything feel intimate and special. I was handling the front of the house, greeting guests and managing reservations, when I saw a familiar face walk through the door. Jenny, looking stunning in a red dress I'd never seen her wear to the office. "You came," I said, genuinely surprised. "Are you kidding? I've been looking forward to this all week. Plus, I brought reinforcements." She gestured behind her, where 3 other people were hanging up their coats. My roommate Sarah, my cousin David, and my boyfriend Marcus. I told them this was the best restaurant in Phoenix and they needed to experience it properly. Watching Jenny interact with Rosa and Miguel, seeing her light up when she tasted the cochinita pibil, I realized something that should have been obvious before. At Hillcrest Financial, I'd thought of Jenny as just another coworker grinding through the same miserable routine. But here, in this warm, welcoming space, I could see who she really was. Someone who showed up for the people she cared about, someone who understood what it meant to support a dream. The first seating was a complete success. Every dish that came out of the kitchen was met with genuine appreciation. People lingered over their meals instead of rushing through them, and I heard at least 6 different groups asking when Rosa would do another event like this. During the brief break between seatings, Rosa found me in the office tallying receipts. "Mija, you should be out there enjoying the party. This is your success too." "I am enjoying it. Look at these numbers, Rosa. We're going to exceed our goal." She sat down across from me, her face serious. "Can I tell you something? When Miguel first suggested this fundraiser, I was terrified. Not about the money, about asking people to help. My whole life, I was taught that asking for help was a weakness, that you handle your problems yourself or you don't deserve to succeed." The words hit closer to home than she probably realized. "But watching tonight," she continued, "seeing how excited people are to be here, to support us, I realized I wasn't asking for charity. I was giving people a chance to be part of something they already loved. There's a difference." There was a difference.
Between my parents, who saw my struggle as a burden to be avoided, and this community, who saw Rosa's challenge as an opportunity to show their support. Between being told you're not someone's problem anymore and being told you're exactly what a place needs. The second seating was even better than the first. By the time we closed, we'd made almost $2,000 in one evening, more than enough to cover our immediate needs and give us breathing room for the future. Saturday night was equally successful, and by the end of the weekend, Rosa's Kitchen had not only caught up on rent, but built a waiting list of people wanting to be notified about future special events. Monday morning, Mr. Patterson showed up with an envelope, expecting to start eviction proceedings. Rosa met him at the door with a check for the full amount owed and a receipt showing the restaurant was current on all payments. "I don't understand," he said, staring at the paperwork. "How did you come up with this money so quickly?" "Community," Rosa said simply. "Something you might not understand, but something that's always been the foundation of this business." After he left, Rosa, Miguel, and I stood in the empty dining room, still decorated with string lights and artwork from the weekend's events. The silence felt different than it had 2 weeks ago, not tense or worried, but peaceful, satisfied. "So what's next?" Miguel asked. Rosa looked at me. "What do you think, Becca? You're the one with the plans." Plans. 6 months ago, my only plan had been to survive each day until the next paycheck. Now I was looking at profit projections and marketing strategies for a business that felt like home. "I think we build on this momentum," I said. "Monthly special events, maybe catering expansion, definitely better marketing to reach the people who don't know this place exists yet. And I think we start planning for growth." Growth? "Rosa, you're sitting on a gold mine. This isn't just a restaurant, it's a community center, an art gallery, a place where people come to feel connected. We could franchise this concept, or open a second location, or—" I stopped talking when I saw Rosa's expression. She was smiling, but there were tears in her eyes. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, mija. It's just, when I hired you, I thought I was getting a bookkeeper. I didn't realize I was getting a partner." Partner. The words settled over me like a warm blanket. Not an employee, not just hired help, but a partner. Someone whose ideas mattered, whose success was tied to the success of the whole. That evening, my phone rang with another unknown Phoenix number. For a moment, I wondered if it was another opportunity, another door opening in this new life I was building. "Hello, this is Becca." "Becca, it's your cousin Amanda." Amanda, my father's sister's daughter, who I hadn't spoken to in almost 3 years. We'd been close as kids, but had drifted apart after college, when life got complicated and family gatherings became awkward. "Amanda, hi. How did you get my number?" "I called your parents looking for you. I'm getting married next month, and I wanted to invite you to the wedding. But when I talked to your mom—" Her voice trailed off. "What did she say?" "She said you weren't part of the family anymore, that you'd made it clear you didn't need any of us. But that didn't sound like the Becca I remember, so I tracked down your number through Jenny. I found her on social media." Jenny. Even people I barely remembered knew that Jenny was the person to contact about my life now. "Amanda, that's not what happened. That's not what I said at all." And for the first time since that terrible phone call with my mother, I told someone the whole truth. Amanda listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished telling her about the collapse, the phone calls, the way our parents had cut me off completely, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Jesus, Becca, I had no idea. Mom made it sound like you told them you didn't want anything to do with the family anymore." "I never said that. I never even implied that. I was just scared and alone and wanted someone to care that I'd ended up in urgent care. And instead of caring, they decided you were too much trouble." Hearing someone else say it out loud made it somehow both more real and less devastating. For months, I'd wondered if maybe I really had been too needy, too dramatic, too much for my parents to handle. But Amanda's shock confirmed what I'd known deep down. Their response had been cruel and unreasonable. "I'm so sorry," Amanda continued. If I'd known what really happened, I would have called months ago. You shouldn't have had to go through all of this alone. I wasn't alone, I said, surprising myself with how true that felt. I mean, I thought I was, but it turned out I had people in my life who actually cared. I just hadn't recognized them yet. I told her about Rose's kitchen, about Jenny's kindness, about finding a place where I was valued and supported. As I talked, I realized how much my life had changed in just a few months. The scared, exhausted person who'd collapsed at her desk felt like someone I'd known a long time ago. "You sound happy," Amanda said. "Really happy. I haven't heard you sound like this since we were kids."
She was right. Despite everything that had happened with my parents, despite the financial stress and uncertainty, I was happy. Not the fake, forced positivity I'd tried to maintain during my time at Hillcrest Financial, but genuine contentment with the life I was building. I am happy, which is weird, because according to Mom and Dad, I should be a complete disaster without their support. Speaking of which, Amanda said, what do I tell them about the wedding? Because you're invited, obviously. You're my family, regardless of whatever drama they've created. The wedding. A family gathering where I'd have to face Patricia and my father for the first time since those devastating phone calls. 6 months ago, the thought would have terrified me. Now it just seemed unnecessary. I don't think that's a good idea, I said. I'm not ready to pretend everything's fine just to avoid making your wedding awkward. What if you didn't have to pretend? What if you just came and enjoyed yourself and let them deal with their own discomfort? It was tempting. Part of me wanted to show up looking healthy and successful to prove that I'd thrived without their support. But a bigger part of me knew that seeking their approval or validation would be a step backward. Amanda, I love you, and I'm so happy you're getting married, but I think I need to pass on this one. I'm finally in a good place, and I don't want to risk that for a few hours of family drama. She understood, which was more than I could have hoped for. We made plans to meet for coffee the following week, just the two of us, to catch up properly without the complicated family dynamics. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment thinking about how different this conversation had been from the ones with my parents. Amanda had listened, asked questions, offered support. She'd treated me like someone whose feelings mattered, whose side of the story was worth hearing. The next morning at Rose's kitchen, I was training our new part-time bookkeeper, a college student named Carlos who needed flexible hours for his classes. Business had picked up so much since the fundraiser that I couldn't handle all the administrative work alone anymore. The key is understanding that every number represents a person, I was telling him, showing him how to track inventory in a way that accounted for Rosa's generous portions and her habit of feeding anyone who looked hungry. This isn't just about profit and loss, it's about keeping a community space alive. Rosa appeared in the office doorway with her usual offering. Today, it was fresh fruit and yogurt parfait that looked like it belonged in a magazine. "How's the training going?" she asked. "Carlos is a natural. He actually suggested a better system for tracking catering orders." "Good, because I have news. That food blogger, the one who came to the fundraiser, she wants to feature us in Phoenix Magazine. And there's a production company interested in filming a documentary about family restaurants." The opportunities kept coming. What had started as a desperate attempt to save Rose's kitchen was turning into something much bigger, a model for how businesses could be both profitable and genuinely community-focused. "There's something else," Rosa said, her expression growing serious. "Miguel and I have been talking, and we want to offer you a partnership, official ownership stake, profit sharing, decision-making authority. What do you think?" Partnership. Real partnership, with legal documents and everything. 6 months ago, I'd been a disposable employee at a company that barely knew my name. Now I was being offered a stake in something I'd helped build and grow. "Rosa, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Miguel called from the kitchen, where he was prepping for the lunch rush. "We need you, Becca. This place isn't the same without you." Need? When was the last time someone had said they needed me and meant it as a compliment rather than a burden? I spent the weekend thinking about it, discussing the details with Rosa and Miguel, consulting with a lawyer, to make sure I understood what I was agreeing to. By Monday morning, I'd made my decision.
The partnership papers were signed on a Tuesday afternoon, with Jenny as our witness and Rosa's whole extended family crowding into the small office to celebrate. Watching Rosa's grandson take pictures, seeing Miguel's proud smile, feeling Jenny squeeze my shoulder in congratulation, I was struck by how full my life had become. A year later, we opened our second location. 3 years later, Rosa's Kitchen was featured in a Netflix documentary about immigrant entrepreneurs. 5 years later, I was giving keynote speeches at business conferences about sustainable growth and community-centered management. But none of those achievements mattered as much as the smaller moments. The regular customers who asked about my day, the staff meetings that felt like family dinners, the sense of purpose that came from building something meaningful with people who valued my contributions.
Patricia called once, about 2 years after our partnership became official. I was at the restaurant, going over plans for a catering contract that would fund scholarships for local culinary students, when my phone rang with that familiar number. "Becca, it's your mother." I could have hung up, I could have let it go to voicemail and deleted it without listening. Instead, I answered. "Hi, Patricia." The use of her first name wasn't lost on either of us. "I've been thinking about our last conversation," she said. "Maybe I was too harsh." Too harsh? Like cutting off your daughter when she's having a health crisis was just a matter of poor word choice? "Maybe you were," I agreed. "I heard from Amanda that you're doing well, that you have your own business now." "I have a partnership in a restaurant, yes." "Well, that's good. I'm glad you figured things out." Figured things out. The same phrase my father had used. Like my success was something that had happened to me rather than something I'd worked for, built, earned through relationships and effort and refusing to give up. "I did figure things out," I said. "I figured out the difference between people who support you and people who abandon you. I figured out that family isn't just about sharing DNA, and I figured out that I'm much stronger than you ever gave me credit for." There was a long pause. "I suppose you are," she said finally. We talked for a few more minutes, carefully polite, like distant acquaintances catching up. When we hung up, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no desperate need for her approval. Just a quiet recognition that some relationships can't be repaired, and that's okay. Rosa found me in the office afterward, staring at my phone. "Everything all right, mija?" "Everything's perfect," I said, and meant it. Because it was perfect, not in the sense of being without problems or challenges, but in the sense of being exactly what I'd built it to be. A life surrounded by people who chose to care about me, who valued my contributions, who treated love as an action rather than a conditional contract. My parents had been right about one thing. I had figured things out. I'd figured out that their definition of family was too small, too conditional, too focused on obligation rather than affection. I'd figured out that the people who mattered were the ones who showed up when things got difficult, not the ones who disappeared at the first sign of trouble. And I'd figured out that sometimes the best thing someone can tell you is that you're not their problem anymore, because it frees you to become someone else's solution, someone else's joy, someone else's chosen family. Rosa's Kitchen was more than a restaurant. It was proof that love isn't something you're born into. It's something you build. One conversation, one meal, one act of kindness at a time. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.